Dante is the master of speaking with the dead. Through his poetry, the fierce condemnation he lays on those who betray virtue, and the quiet dignity many of his subjects retain in the midst of insurmountable agony and suffering, Dante teaches us the truths about life that we cannot yet understand because we are still living. Across the 34 canti of the Inferno, the first part of the epic poem The Divine Comedy, Dante is able to illustrate the unforgettable journey traveling through the 9 circles of hell, guided by the ancient Roman poet Virgil. The reader accompanies Dante as he enters Inferno through the gates of hell, where he is besieged by resounding sighs, wailing, strange languages, and accents of anger before he finally meets the damned. He descends through the narrowing circles of hell, watching souls guilty of sins like lust, gluttony, avarice, anger, heresy, violence, fraud, and treachery, who writhe from the specific punishments forced upon them by the divine justice of God, until he finally comes face to face with Lucifer himself. While Dante explores many themes, stories, and histories in his work, one of the most profound motives he examines is the nexus between body and soul, which will be explored in Cantos 10, 13, and 33. But before we take our first steps into hell, we must remember the warning Dante gave us at the beginning of his poem. Lasciate ogni speranza voi che entrate. After descending into the city of Dis, Dante and Virgil come across the 6th circle of hell. As Virgil leads him, Dante walks along the wall of the city and overhears the grievous torments, laments, and groans of the souls around him. Rounding a corner, Dante suddenly sees souls lying in open and unguarded flaming sepulchres, their faces contorted in unmistakable torment. Virgil clarifies that these tombs belong to the Epicurean heretics, who during their lifetime rejected the immortality of the soul. Because of this disbelief, come Judgment Day, their tombs will be forever closed to God. One of the shades in the tomb, Ghibelline leader Farinata degli Uberti, recognizes Dante's Florentine accent and rises. He speaks with Dante about his political power and presents himself as superior to both hell and suffering. Their conversation is interrupted by Cavalcante dei Cavalcanti, the tomb-mate of Farinata and father of Dante's close friend and poet, Guido. Farinata resumes talking with Dante, and through this exclusionary and monologic dialogue, Dante learns about his future exile and realizes that the souls in hell can see the events of the future, but never the events of the present. Both these shades that oppose Dante's Christian belief in the soul's immortality are Florentine, one caught up in the earthly passion of politics, the other in the passion of intellectualism. Though these two souls represent the materialistic attachment of Dante to his Florence, its politics, and fellow poets, Dante rejects their belief of a corporeal soul and places them in the transitory and ephemeral, with no knowledge of the present and condemned to an immutable torment in hell. Individuals like Epicurus, who sought temporal and instant pleasure of the flesh, do not partake in a rewarding afterlife, condemning the soul to suffer eternally. Their attachment to the present and their materialistic gratification force them to live in a hell in which, as Farinata says, nulla sapem di vostro stato umano. We know nothing of your human state. By separating them from knowledge, Dante separates them from truth and from life. As Dante turns upon a path and leaves this circle, he turns back as if to warn us against choosing a life contrary to Christ when you have the ability to follow him. In other words, he warns us against being a heretic.
After descending a precarious cliff to leave the 6th circle of hell, Dante and Virgil enter the 7th, which houses the violent. They fortuitously find themselves in a wood. The leaves in the dense thicket surrounding them are dark, and the branches are contorted into knots of unmistakable agony. Perched on the brambles are hideous harpies, who ruffle their feathers and leer at Dante and Virgil as they walk by. The air is still, but Dante hears cries of woe on all sides of him, though he cannot determine their origin. Virgil instructs him to break off a twig from a nearby branch, and when Dante does so, the twig bleeds and cries in agony. Dante is taken aback, and he later learns that this Thornbrush was once a man named Piero della Vigne, who took his own life after being falsely accused of conspiring against his master. Thus, we learn that he is in the realm of the suicides, who, ungrateful for their bodies on earth, are deprived of flesh in hell. The warping and twisting of the soul, predicated on its dissociation with the body, manifests in hell as the distorted nodding on the branches. Because they forsook their body during their lives, these souls will never reunite with them even through the Last Judgment, after which their bodies will hang lifelessly on the branches as a reminder of their sin. Piero tells Dante that when a soul is condemned to this fate by Minos, it is cast to the wood and sprouts in the location chance has determined. Dante deliberately contrasts this with Christ's parable of the sower, invoking the theme of divine irony. This divine justice causes these woods to remain forever dark, the act of suicide forever denying its victims the light of God. Although compelled by love and moved by pity, Dante finally leaves the thicket, reminding us that the union of body and soul is not one to be taken lightly.
As Dante enters the ninth circle of hell, the lair of the treacherous, he comes across a vast frozen lake as clear as glass. This part of hell is cold, dark, and silent. So cold that souls are almost completely swallowed by the biting anger of ice. Even their tears are frozen momentarily after being shed. So silent that the only semblance of sound are his feet slowly treading on the surface of the ice. As Virgil leads Dante through this lair, Dante comes across one sinner savagely gnawing on the head of another, as the other listlessly groans. The gnawing sinner lifts his head momentarily from his masticating, wipes his mouth grotesquely, and addresses Dante. He is Count Ugolino, and the head whom he is chewing is Archbishop Ruggieri, the traitor who imprisoned and starved him and his sons. As Ugolino's sons start to slowly and softly perish in the Tower of Hunger, they lament their father's desperate state of hunger and offer themselves to his appetite, reminiscent of Christ's sacrifice for humanity, before pitifully dying. Overtaken by an animalistic desire to satisfy his primal hunger and obfuscate his grief, Ugolino ferociously devours the flesh of his dead sons. Through Ugolino's harrowing and appalling tale, more degrading than any Dante has yet encountered, Dante illustrates how cannibalism is a replacement of the soul's virtue and emotion with a primitive desire to satisfy the hunger of the flesh. Next to Ugolino, Dante comes across two souls, Fra Alberigo and Brancadoria, who broke the sacred act of communion by viciously poisoning their guests to increase their own political power. Alberigo reluctantly explains that these sinners who committed grave and unpardonable sins are immediately hastened to the ninth circle, and their body is possessed by a demon for the remainder of their life on earth. This immediate separation of soul and body show the severity of their sins, so severe that even repentance, the promise of God, is no longer efficacious.
Although many of Dante's contemporaries regarded the Inferno as a dangerous work, it was instantly regarded as a brilliant piece of poetry. This work not only cemented itself in the literary canon, but also influenced the evolution of the Italian language, as he wrote his Commedia in vernacular Italian, making it more accessible to the people of his time. The Inferno dispersed across space and time, inspiring musicians such as Tchaikovsky and Handel, writers from Geoffrey Chaucer to Dan Brown, artists including Botticelli, Rodin, and Dalí, and even video games. Regardless of the prevailing cultural sentiment, Dante's Inferno continues to be an influential work, and his conceptions of heaven, hell, virtue, and reason will most likely continue to influence scholars and laymen alike for years to come.